Hello, YouTube divers. This is WaterDive122, and I want to welcome you all to another episode of Magic Metal Mondays. We are back with another album review. We're heading back to Slayer. Yes, the evil realm of the mighty Slayer. So, last time we did a Slayer album review, we reviewed the classic metal album Rain and Blood. This time we are going to review the follow-up album in Rain and Blood, the 1988 album South of Heaven. Oh boy. So, many Slayer fans love this album, including myself. Although it is a significant step down to Rain and Blood, they really decided to do some more experimentation on this album. It is, at the time, this was their slowest album, because all three of their previous albums, Show No Mercy, Hell Awaits, and the aforementioned Rain and Blood, were all in-your-face, thrashy, as I will get out, fast as I will get out metal albums. Yeah, they were just thrashy, they were heavy, they were fast, they were just typical Slayer. But when this thing came out, it just slowed things down a bit. Now, a lot of Slayer fans like the changes on this album. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's still some like classic Slayer elements. Like there's still some fast songs, there's still some thrashy songs. But a lot of the songs on here, I feel like mid-tempo, Tom Araya is using more melodic vocals instead of the usual like fast-speaking type of thrash metal lyrics or vocal style that many thrash metal singers use, for that matter. Excuse me. He really decides to sing more melodically on this album. And you know, the production, in my opinion, is better on this album compared to Rain and Blood, although that can go into either debate. South of Heaven has a more cleaner production. For an arguably more suspenseful and more evil album than Rain and Blood. I mean, I don't think it's more evil than Rain and Blood. I mean, they're kind of on the same level. It just depends on what you define evil is for an album. But before we get into the tracks of this amazing album, let's talk about the album cover. The album cover to South of Heaven is probably one of my favorite album cover arts in all of metal. Definitely my favorite Slayer album cover. I mean, the skull looking at you straight in the eye. Whoo! It's creepy. It's creepy. It's so freaking amazing. It's amazing. It's so flippin' amazing. And if you don't believe me, go look up the album cover to South of Heaven right now. And then come back here. Because it is amazing. It is freaking amazing. Every time I listen to this album on YouTube, I just stare at the album cover the entire time. Like, I want to find an audio version where it's just nothing but the audio with the album cover. Because that album cover just keeps my eyes glued onto this album. I don't know what it is. I just love the album cover for South of Heaven. I don't know what it is. But let's move on before I start babbling on and on about the album cover for South of Heaven. Let's get into the tracks. So, like with Rain and Blood, there are 10 songs on this album. But unlike Rain and Blood, the songs are a little bit longer. This is a little bit of a longer album compared to Rain and Blood. It's about 7 or 8 minutes longer than Rain and Blood, so you get more Slayer, although a different form of Slayer. So the album opens up with the classic and iconic title track, South of Heaven, and, well, it's a classic for a reason. I love that song. It's easily my favorite song on the album. It's a phenomenal track. The riff sets up the mood for the entire thing. Like the intro, Tom Araya's vocals is top notch on here. The solos are amazing. Dave Lombardo is in his element on this song, and really on this entire album for that matter. Yeah, South of Heaven, title track, amazing song. One of my all-time favorite Slayer songs. Then the second track is Silent Scream. This is classic Slayer. At their most evil, at their most heavy. It sounds like a song that was left off of Rain and Blood. And part of me wishes that this song was on Rain and Blood, But, if this song was not on South of Heaven, then you would have had a lot more, like, slower songs. This is definitely the fastest and probably the most heaviest song on the album. It's a phenomenal track. I love Silent Scream. Next up is Live on Dead, and Live on Dead, ironically enough, was named. Slayer reused that name again when they toured in 1991 or something like that. I don't know. I think it was the name of a tour they did a while back or a little bit after this album. But they released it as a song here, and holy jeez, this is a freaking amazing song. I love it. It's so heavy. It's not even heavy yet. It's still very heavy, if that even makes sense. I adore that song. It's a great song. Next up is Behind the Crooked Cross. Sorry for that. This is definitely one of the more mid-tempo, slower songs on the album. And by slow, it's not really that slow compared to like what you define as the term slow. Like, it's more mid-tempo. It's still a little bit fast. It's just not as fast as some of their other songs. But Behind the Crooked Cross, the chorus is amazing. And really, Behind the Crooked Cross is amongst one of my favorite songs on the album. It's a very impressive song. I will give him that. And then track number 5 on this album is another classic, Mandatory Suicide. Definitely my second favorite song behind the title track. Yeah, is there really an explanation? This is a live staple in the band's live sets. This is the chorus where he's just whispering suicide, suicide, suicide. I mean, it's so catchy, and it's Slayer. It's freaking Slayer. What more do you want? And then after that, you get Ghosts of War, which is another thrash metal song, like a very fast tempoed song, kind of like with Silent Scream and Behind the Crooked Cross. Maybe Live on Dead as well. And the bridge riff, oh my goodness gracious. The riff in the bridge of Ghosts of War is just sheer brilliance. One of the best Slayer riffs ever. And then on the next song, Read Between the Lies, in my opinion, the main riff of Read Between the Lies and the bridge riff of Ghosts of War kind of sound the same to me. Like, I wonder if Slayer was trying to do like 2 songs smushed together. Like, don't they seem like logical carbon copies of one another, riff-wise? I wonder if Slayer initially had those 2 songs stuck together, like what Megadeth had on Peace Sells But Who's Buying, with Good Morning and Black Friday. Who knows? Maybe they weren't going for that, but my point is that the bridge riff on Ghosts of War and the main riff of Read Between the Lies sounds very, very similar, almost to the point of being a carbon copy, in my opinion. So, yeah, there's that. Track number 8 is Cleanse the Soul. This is a really, really great song. I mean, it's definitely one of the more mid-tempo tracks on the album. Tom Araya is again in his element. Jeff Hanneman and Kerry King. The solos between those two are just so pleasant to listen to. And of course, Dave, the godfather of the double bass pedal Lombardo. I know I mention that every time I talk about him, but how could I not? His drumming, top notch on here. I adore this track. It's probably my favorite out of the slow songs on this album, and I think a lot of Slayer fans who adore this album as much as I do, would agree with me to a certain point, to a certain retrospect, if that's even a thing. Then track number 9 is their cover of Judas Priest's Dissident Aggressor. Funny thing about this track is that I didn't know that Dissident Aggressor was originally recorded and released by Judas Priest. And that Slayer just put a cover on one of their albums, on one of Slayer's albums, if that makes sense. But I enjoy this, and I haven't heard the Judas Priest version yet. I will soon. But as of right now, Slayer did it. They actually managed to make a cover as if it was their own original song. I mean, Anthrax did that with Got the Time. And I think Megadeth did that with I Ain't Superstitious and Anarchy in the UK. Things like that. But here Slayer just does it a top-notch brilliance. It's just amazing. And then finally the album closes off on a slow note, just like how it started with Spill the Blood. It's very close with Cleanse the Soul of being my favorite out of the slow songs on the album. But that acoustic riff that opens up the song, holy goodness freaking gracious. That is one of the creepiest, most suspenseful Slayer riffs you will ever hear. And of course, Tom Araya, this is another one of those examples where he sings in a more melodic-ish type of way. The solos on here are just amazing. The drumming, everything about this song. And really, this song basically sums up how good this album is. Excuse me a second. Anyways, as I was saying, Spill the Blood to me perfectly sums up how good of an album South of Heaven is. And it ends the album off with a banger, and ironically enough, and to me, it kind of gives us a little bit of a foreshadow of what Slayer is going to do on their next album, which we get Seasons in the Abyss. I will make an album review on that album. Don't worry. I have not forgotten about Seasons in the Abyss. But anyways, so let's get to the final rating. Now that we've gone through all the tracks, my final rating of South of Heaven is a 9 out of 10. Now, my only gripe with South of Heaven, and the reason why it is not a perfect 10 out of 10, the reason why I'm giving it a 9 out of 10 is because of the repetitive riff usage-ish of Ghosts of War, the bridge riff, and the main riff of Read Between the Lines. Like, I know these two riffs are technically different from each other, but to me they sound almost identical. And if Slayer did a different riff on Read Between the Lines, for example, then this album would have been a 10 out of 10. I don't really like riff repetition used in two completely different songs. Like if you're repeating a riff on a song, like on one song, that's fine. But to me, I don't really know. I'm not really a big fan. I mean, I like certain callbacks to certain songs, but when you have a song that has the riff and then the next song right after that has nearly the same riff, it just kind of, yeah, I don't know. It's weird. It's hard for me to explain. It's just a weird concept. But Slayer just made up their own riff for Read Between the Lines, then this album would have been a perfect 10 out of 10. I love this album. And if you remember from my Slayer album rankings, I have this at number 3. This could be very interchangeable with Seasons in the Abyss, because I love these two albums pretty much almost equally. Of course, South of Heaven will never touch Rain and Blood. I will always love Rain and Blood more. But South of Heaven, in of its own self, is a phenomenal thrash metal album. Yeah, it is a little bit slower compared to, I wouldn't even say other albums by Slayer, but from any thrash metal band in general. It's not really that fast, it's not really that intense, it's not really that raw, it's not really that heavy. It's more creepy, more doomy, more suspenseful, more, it's more unpredictable. Like, if you like your metal unpredictable and doomy and slow, you'll love this album. Um, and you know, it's and like I said, it does have some faster elements throughout this album. They didn't totally abandon the thrash metal icons that made them a household name like we get on Rain and Blood. But with South of Heaven, it's just its own unique direction, and for that I cannot applaud Slayer more enough. This album really shows that the band had variety in their sound, and it's what makes this album stand out in the Slayer discography. And you know, that's why it's one of my favorite albums from Slayer. So with that said, that concludes this edition from I mean this bleh, excuse me. That concludes this edition of Magic Metal Mondays. Thank you so much for watching, my fellow YouTube divers. This is Water 122 signing out, ready to dive into more fun on YouTube. Thanks for watching.